this morning because there's that thing on your mind that is the project that's due or the thing that's coming up, and you don't even want to face it. And it's almost easier just to turn over in bed and say, can I just go back to sleep? The dream is better than reality, right? And if you're not there, don't worry. In a couple of days, you'll be experiencing pressure, because that's one thing that we can all count on, is that we're going to get pressure from every side. Our life is one pressure after the next pressure after the next pressure. And, the thing about pressure is pressure's not good and it's not bad in and of itself. It just is. It's just a reality that each of us face. And pressure can cause us to move in a positive direction. I get to work quite often with the students from ABTS Delhi, the seminary that our churches help start. And there's quite a few of our guys that are a part of that seminary. They're taking classes. And what's interesting to me is you've got 3 months to complete an assignment. And I'll talk to them at the beginning of that time, and it's like, hey, have you thought about your assignment? And, no, I'll get to it. 1 month, first month, there's no pressure, no work on the assignment. Month 2, a little bit more pressure, but, this is India, there's still no work on the assignment. Month 3, we start to move, but by 2 weeks before that assignment is due, that's when the calls start coming in. Because these are big projects. They're like, John, what do? I didn't understand this part. Help, right? Because now we're starting to feel the pressure. And then 2 days before, there's even more activity. Oh no, I've got to get it done. And somehow all of that pressure prompts all of these students to get their projects in. Even if it's at like 11:59 and a half before midnight when it's due. Those papers are all done. Because there's something about pressure that can cause us to be really focused and accomplish the things that we know we need to get done. But isn't it true also that pressure can push us in a direction that we don't like? Pressure can cause us to feel the stress and the anxiety, and and all of that pressure can move us in a direction of anger and of being short-tempered with those that we love. It can cause us to perhaps doubt the things that we believe and hold dear, can actually cause us to compromise in areas that we never thought we would, because that pressure is just moving us in that direction. Like a balloon, you apply the same kind of helium pressure to it, and the balloon either soars up into the air or it explodes. The question is, what is that balloon made of? How does it handle that pressure? And as we see in life, as we see in the Bible, as we see all throughout in other people in our sphere of influence, is that people, when they experience pressure, they often either use that as an opportunity to soar, or it actually can cause irreparable damage in their life. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at pressure. We're going to look at pressure from God's perspective. We're going to examine some parts of Scripture that talk about that, and we're going to see what God might have to say to us about how to handle pressure in a positive way. And even before we get started, I want to point something out to you, is that God actually leverages pressure. God leverages pressure. He has leveraged pressure in the past with whole groups of people, with individuals, and most likely He's going to leverage pressure in your life to help you move in a positive direction. It's a tool in God's toolbox that He often uses, because pressure has such a motivating effect on us. Today we're going to look at a passage of Scripture. It's in 1 Kings chapter 18. If you want to turn there, you can. We're going to have the words on the screen in a minute. But what I want to kind of dive into and we want to examine is a situation that happened in the life of Elijah. And we're kind of coming in the middle of the story. It's kind of like a movie. We're kind of coming in the middle, and we're going to examine one scene. And so you have to understand a little bit about what's happened before that so that you can kind of appreciate what's happening in the scene. And so in broad picture terms, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, He said, I want to do something in order to woo the people of the world to me. I'm going to choose the nation of Israel, and I am going to bless them. I'm going to pour out so much of my blessing on them that all the other nations around will look and say, wow, there's a God in Israel, and I want to worship Him because He is God. He's blessing them. I want what they have. That was God's plan. And so that went well for a while, but then after some time, the people of Israel started to talk to the people of the surrounding nations. And it would, this was a very agricultural society, lots of crops being grown and herds being watered and all of that stuff. And as these Israelites would go and they would meet these other farmers and do trade and everything with people from other countries, inevitably they would be talking about their gods. And everyone around, all of the other nations, they worshipped Baal, the god of the storm. And they put their trust and their confidence in Baal. And so, as you can imagine, there was pressure that was coming every time the Israelite went. And they're saying, hey, we do this for Baal, we do that for Baal, we make sure that Baal is on our side. I prayed to Baal one time and he made it rain. Where's your altar to Baal? And the Israelite would stand there and kind of put his hands in his pocket and say, well, we worship Yahweh. You're like, okay, that's fine, you can worship Yahweh, but you'd better make sure you also worship Baal because that's who you should trust. If you did a poll at that time or did a survey of everybody around, all of the other nations, who should you trust to succeed? What should you do to succeed in life? Their number one answer would be, make sure you keep Baal happy. Okay? Keep that in mind. The pressure started coming for Israel from all around. Everybody else is doing it. Everybody is worshiping Baal. Why should we worship Yahweh? The kings of Israel started to reject Yahweh and turn to Baal. And at this time, as we're going to enter this scene, the king is named Ahab. The king of Israel at that time, his name is Ahab. And he's married a lovely woman by the name of Jezebel. And she's a sweet thing. Just kidding, if you know Jezebel. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But Jezebel's a lady that was from one of the other nations. And she came and she was like, oh, Ahab, honey, I love you, but I want you to start building all these temples to Baal because that's my God. If you love me, you'll bring Baal worship here. I want my prophets to come and teach you how to worship Baal right. Okay, honey, you brought me from this faraway land. I'm in your country. The least you can do, pretty please, is make me, is start this Baal worship. And so he started widespread, unlike anybody before him, of worshiping Baal all throughout the country. In fact, it got so bad that he started putting to death the prophets of God. And you want to talk about pressure for that Israelite who's sitting there, who's all the time heard the old stories of Yahweh and heard that they should be an example of Yahweh. But here's the king saying, you have to worship Baal. Here's the king and all the religious leaders, all the people that are cool and on TV. All of them are saying, you've got to worship Baal. And the ones that are standing out speaking for Yahweh, they're being put to death. They're being put in jail. Things are not going well for them. So God decided he's going to leverage pressure in this situation. And so God sends his prophet Elijah. And Elijah, with a camel kind of skin coat and looking really ragged and tagged, he goes into the king of Israel, who's dressed in his nice robes and his throne. And he says, King Ahab, you go on worshiping Baal, but let me tell you, your God of the storm, that's Baal, by the way. God of the storm. He's the one that's responsible for rain. He's responsible for wind and lightning and all that stuff. You trust your God of the storm, Baal, but Yahweh says it's not going to rain until I say it rains. Everybody's laughing and he leaves. But then 1 month goes by and not one drop of rain. 2 months go by. 6 months go by. A year goes by. I want you to imagine in this kind of agricultural society. Imagine what would happen in India if there was no rain for 3 years. No monsoons, no rains, nothing for 3 years. The Israelite, even the ones that were trusting in God, have been praying for rain now. Yahweh, give us rain. Their kids are thirsty. Their kids are hungry. Their family is starving. Their crops are not growing. Year 1 goes by. Year 2 goes by. 3 years go by. And that's where we're going to enter the scene. Because finally God has leveraged some pressure and Yahweh's about to say, hey, I'm leveraging pressure because I want to do something significant in you and I want to see how you're responding to pressure. And so we're going to look at this scene that happens as Elijah comes back into the scene and says, okay, Ahab, I'm back. This is what you need to do. Bring all the people from all over the place. We don't have TV yet. It's not going to be invented for a few hundred years. So you bring everybody here to this mountain. Bring all your hundreds of prophets of Baal, and we're going to see who is God. Now, everybody comes. This is where we're going to pick up our story. Now you know what's happened up until now. And this is the part in the movie when it's like the music is crescendoing, right? Dun, 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 dun. You know, like this is the exciting part of the story. You need to go back this week and read like the whole thing, starting in chapter 16. But anyway, we don't have time for all that today. We're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 20. It says, so Ahab summoned all the people and the prophets, that's the prophets of Baal, to Mount Carmel. And Elijah stood in front of them and said, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? If Yahweh, that's the Lord, if there's ever Lord in all caps, that's actually written originally in Hebrew as Yahweh. Yahweh, okay? You say it with me? Yahweh. Yahweh, yeah. That's the God's name, actually, like as he presented. That's his name. Yahweh he's saying, if Yahweh is God, then we need to trust him. If Baal is God, then we trust him. We're going to find out today who is right. Verse 22, then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left. Baal has 450 prophets. So let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, no fire. Whichever God brings down fire, we're going to trust him, okay? And everybody said, it says at the end of verse 24, all the people agreed. Verse 25, then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it, and call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to the wood. So they prepared the bull, they prepared the altar, they did all of this stuff, and look at what it says. They sat there and started crying out, oh, Baal, answer us. Come on, from morning till noontime. Baal, would you please show up? Would you bend in our direction? Please, we need you. What does it say? There was no reply of any kind. So they started dancing and hobbling and doing all kinds of things and saying, Baal, would you please hear us? Verse 27, about noontime, Elijah began mocking them. This is kind of funny. Like, if you're sitting there, imagine that you are actually sitting there with me and we're standing on the side of that mountain watching this. There's 450 prophets of Baal who all of them have been telling us the thing you need to do is trust in Baal. Baal's the one you can trust. And here's all of them dancing around. And Elijah's like mocking them, saying, hey, maybe he's asleep. You got to cry louder. Maybe he's like going to the bathroom. He like took the paper in there like dad did, granddad did, like he's in there for a while. You'd better really get his attention, right? Or maybe he's away on a trip. You've got to call him from a long way away. So, verse 28, so they shouted louder, and they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood was gushing out. Guys, these folks were sincere. They were sincerely crying out to their God. They were sincerely calling out. But unfortunately, let's see what it says. Verse 29, but still there was no reply, no voice, no response. See, it wasn't the lack of their sincerity. It was the object of their trust that was the problem. Under pressure, they had chosen to trust Baal, the god of the storm. But when all of it came there, they came to the stark reality at this time. After 3 years of crying out for rain, no rain, after all of this whole day of crying out and slashing themselves and trying to get Baal's attention, the object of their trust was silent. Lest we think that, hey, this is somehow just about Baal. In our society, nobody's pressuring us to worship Baal. Nobody's saying you gotta put your trust in Baal. In fact, for centuries, nobody's really in the world really trusted Baal or thought about Baal. This is an ancient kind of a thinking. But there are still, nevertheless, pressures that are coming at us from all sides. Voices on TV, from your family, from your work, from your friends, that are saying, this is what you need to trust if you want to succeed. This is what you need in order to go far in life. This is what you need. Some of them, as I say these, there's more, but as I say even some of these, it might make you feel uncomfortable, like it makes me feel uncomfortable. Because I know that some part of me trusts in these as well. We trust in education. For a kid, the most important thing, yes, they can go to church. We should, read them the Bible some. That's good. Let them have some good morals. But they really need to pass these exams. They really need to do well, because if they do well, they could be set for the rest of their future. Hey, if you've got this job, there's not that many high-paying jobs out there. This is your opportunity. You'd better not blow it. You can go to church, you can trust God, you can read your Bible, do all those things, but make sure you don't lose your job. Make sure that you do the things you can to be promoted and move up the ladder in your corporate job. Hey, you never know what's going to happen. But if you have enough money in the bank, if you can save, if you can keep saving and saving and saving, then you can have enough when everything falls all around you. You'll be safe. You'll be protected. You can provide for your family. You need to save. Hey, I know you're lonely now. If you can just get married, if we can just find you the right one, if we can just find your son or your daughter the right one, then that'll be fine. Your family will be complete. The list goes on, but the pressures are real. And the pressures that come leaves us at the end of the day, even though right now everybody around is pressuring us and pushing us to move in those directions. When the object of our faith, the object of our trust becomes these things, even in a little way, what it does is it's eventually going to leave us asking the question, why is it silent? Why is this? What happened when things fall around? My dad worked for the same company for 20 years. He'd always felt like that company was going to continue to provide for him. He climbed the ladder. He was a vice president. And the economy turned and the company fired him after 20 years, just like that. At a time when he had been thinking, hey, most of my identity is wrapped up in who I am at this job, all of a sudden was sitting there asking these questions. What happened? What happened to this job that I was trusting in? I've known countless people who felt like they would be satisfied if they could only be married. And on the other end of that experience was a life that was like, is this what I signed up for? And all too often, things come up in our life and crisis happens and our bank accounts end up dry. And we sit there without that safety net going, what have I trusted in? What has gone on? How do I, and we feel uncomfortable in the pressure of that as we realize that all the things that we thought was going to provide, the things that we thought we could trust on, are silent. See, pressure affects your perspective. And when we get pressure from outside, pressure at work, pressure from family, what it does is it affects our perspective and can actually lead us, second one, pressure causes us to compromise, can lead you to compromise. Compromise in doing the things that you said you'd never do. And we may not exactly be only trusting in that. This is what we Christians are sometimes good at. If you're not a Christ follower yet, let me just tell you, this is what we get good at, okay? We get good at saying, God, I trust you to provide me a job. I trust you to help me with this exam. Every Christian prays at exam time. Every Christian, doesn't matter who you are, every Christian sits there, and actually pretty much everybody prays to whoever they want to pray to at exam time, right? Because please help us to do well on the exam. Help me to do good on the job. Help me to get that deal signed. But when we ask the wrong questions, we get the wrong answers. And on the other end of that are people that say, I don't know if I can even trust God. I don't know if Yahweh can be trusted because He didn't give me the job. He didn't help me in the exam. I failed. What do I do with that? And like the people of Israel who were sitting there looking, who'd been crying out for rain for 3 years, they were about to see what God was going to do as He shook things up. So we've now gone all day in our story. We're back to the story. The prophets of Baal, 450 of them, have been slashing themselves and screaming and crying and dancing and doing everything they can to get Baal's attention. And now, dun 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 dun, right? So here's now Elijah steps up. Verse 30. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come over here," and they all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of Yahweh that had been torn down. And he took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel. And he used the stones to rebuild Yahweh's altar, because nobody had cared about Yahweh's altar for years and years and years. And he makes the sacrifice, he puts it all there, and he tells them, "Hey, I want you to pour water over this whole thing." And so he gets them to just keep pouring bucket after bucket after bucket of water over this whole thing, 12 buckets full. And at the end of all of that, even in the trench around, there's so much water. And in verse 36, at the customary time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, "O Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Yahweh, answer me. Answer me so that these people will know two things. Answer me so that your people will know two things. Number one, that you, O Yahweh, are God. And number two, that you have brought them back to yourself." Your translation might say that you're turning their hearts back to you, because that's the image that was used. Of a man that's trying to woo the woman. A father trying to woo his child who's gone astray. It's God who's trying to woo His people back, because that's what God is good at. And Elijah here, even in these few moments here, is not sitting there slashing himself, trying to say, "God, bend in our direction and do something." He's just saying, "God, you told me to do this. Now I want you to show that all of these people, that you actually have been leveraging all of this pressure so that they would be wooed back to you." In verse 38, immediately, like that, the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven. It burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, even licked up the water in the ditch. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they cried out, "Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God." I wish I had been there. See, these guys did what every other person in recorded history has done when they've seen a glimpse of God's greatness. Nobody stood up and said, "Oh, Yahweh, now we know that you're the God. Okay, sorry for the last few years. Could you, help me with my wheat? Because my wheat field is just terrible right now." Nobody stood up and said, "Yahweh, where's the rain? Could you send rain? Yahweh, my aunt is really sick. Could you heal her?" Because their perspective when they saw who God was in that moment changed, and they understood that Yahweh, the God who is big, and I am not. See, under pressure, we do not trust the rain. We trust the God who created the rain. We don't sit there and approach God and say, "God, Yahweh, we trust our job," or we don't even pray, "Yahweh, we trust you to get us our job." We say, "Yahweh, God, we trust you, full stop. We trust you, full stop. God, I'm not trusting in you to help me get these exams. I'm trusting in you, full stop. God, I'm not trusting in you to get me a spouse or to help my child find a spouse. I'm trusting in you, full stop. My friends, there's a huge difference in the object in which we're placing our trust. We don't pray that God sends rain. We pray and we trust the God who creates rain. Period. And some of you are feeling maybe a bit uncomfortable because you're saying, well, John, you keep getting all bad about education and jobs and all this stuff. What are we supposed to do? Just not study? You're thinking that. I know you are. Some of you really have been thinking about that the whole time. It's a valid question. See, God created marriage. He created jobs. He created work. He created us. All these things. He wants us to learn and grow. My friend, there's a huge difference between approaching things like work, saying, God, I work for you. I don't work for my boss. God, I trust you to provide for my family. I don't trust the paycheck. And I'm going to work today because I am your child, and I'm going to do my best because I work for you. Instead of saying, I have to get that promotion, I have to perform, because if not, I lose my job and I lose my paycheck. There is a world of difference. And sometimes under pressure, we lose sight of that difference. It's not, God, it's God, I trust you. I'm going into that exam and I've prepared and I'm going to do my best. But God, at the end of the day, I trust you for my future. Instead of, boy, if I don't get that grade, my future is done. Huge difference in how you approach exams, how you approach job, how you approach money, how you approach relationships, how you fill in the blank. All of these areas of pressure. We do not trust the rain. We trust the God, Yahweh, who creates the rain. So as we leave here this week, I'm going to give you a little homework because I know that this week you're going to experience pressure. You're going to be sitting there at the office. You're going to be sitting there in the classroom. You're going to be sitting somewhere in your family setting, and there's going to be pressure. And when you experience that pressure, I want you to get in the habit of saying a 10-second prayer. God, I'm not trusting in the rain, or I'm not trusting in whatever it is that you fill in the blank. I'm not trusting in this other thing. I'm trusting in you. You know my needs. God, I'm not going to try to figure out how you should work in my situation. God, I trust in you, full stop. That's our prayer. God, I'm not trusting in anything else. I'm trusting in you. You know my needs. Or maybe some of us here today maybe some of you that you're not even sure you can trust Yahweh. You're not even sure that this whole, God of the Bible is even worth trusting. And that's fine. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're learning and asking questions. What I would challenge you to do is this week, don't say that prayer. I want to challenge you to say a different prayer. God, would you, I don't even know if I can trust you, but would you show yourself to me? Would you show me like you did in the Old Testament? Would you show me like the people in Elijah's time, that who you are and how great you are so that I can even trust you? Would you show yourself to me? My friend, the God who is the Creator, the God who through centuries and centuries and centuries has been trying to pull the hearts of people towards Himself, will honor that prayer. I know, because He's been doing it for thousands of years. By the way, at the end of the story, God does send rain. A revival happens. People start to recognize Yahweh is God. And as we sit here as a community, my prayer for us as a community of people living in this city, with all of these pressures around, that you and I would be known as the men and the women who in the midst of all of this pressure, instead of falling apart, instead of exploding, instead of having all of these flaws come out in our character, that we would soar as we are pushed towards trusting more and more deeply in Yahweh, the God who is. Under pressure, we don't trust rain. We trust the God who creates the rain.